Wait, is he a Carlton player?
He's a Carlton player.
Oh my God.
Important question.
You think we can get a Carlton from?
Like the only house in Melbourne where no one knows who Chris Judd is.
I mean, I'm technically not a Carlton player. A long time ago I was.
It's true.
All right, guys, we're now streaming live, and I'm going to open the doors.
You?
Good numbers. Oh, it is Rachel. That was just your class.
Someone's calling me now.
Come on, guys, one of you have to switch off your thing.
All right, gentlemen, we're live.
All right, Brian, you tell me when we're ready to kick off, or I'll kick off.
We are definitely good to go.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another incredible YJP event. We've been smashing it, and it's really great to finish off this year's grand final season with one of the legends in footy. I want to just begin by saying I don't know much about footy, unfortunately. I'm an English boy, and the only football I know is the true football, which we call soccer here. But it's really such an honor to have you here, Chris, and I really appreciate you joining us. But one thing I do know is that in footy, you need to have a good team and you need to reach your goals. And I think YJP has been all about creating team dynamic. It's all about bringing people together. We all know the cliche, team stands for together, everyone achieves more. And we've seen through this whole COVID period that coming together, we've all been able to really achieve a lot together. And we've been kicking the goals. We've been getting those goals. And it's really an honor to have you here. And I want to thank you on behalf of all of us. I want to specifically thank you, Judd Gottlieb, for making this happen. Thank you, Judd. And I want to thank Zalman, and specifically also Brian. I want to thank behind the scene who does so much work for YJP. So thank you for all of that. So we'll get right into it because people are not here to hear me tonight. We'll get right into it and introduce you, Judd Gottlieb, to take it away from here.
Thanks, Moishi, and thanks, Juddy, for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. And, good to see you're still being a good statesman for the game and willing to share your stories, and we really appreciate it. Just in terms of the format of the night, I don't think there's going to be anything said here that you may not have heard before, but maybe there will be. So, let's keep it within the forum of YJP, and we'll kick off here. Juddy, I've got a question for you. It's been on our mind for a while here in the Jewish community. You're a champion player and a great statesman for the game, and you grew up locally and attended Caulfield Grammar. Now, there's a rumor going around early days that there's a connection to the Jewish community. So we've all claimed you since for your whole career, but can you put those rumors to bed? Can you shed any light on that rumor?
It's come up. Well, firstly, thanks for having me, Yehuda and Moshi. It has come up a little bit, Yehuda, and Dick Pratt was one of the first people that brought it to my attention. But there was a woman in my lineage about 6 generations ago who was Jewish and had uninterrupted daughters up until my mum. So technically, I'm in the gang. I could argue that I'm the greatest Jewish footballer of all time, I think.
We'll take it. Well, Moishi's going to be over at your place right now. he's left the Zoom and is at your place with some filling. I'm sure you'll find out all about it.
Yeah. So I know it's very good research by you, Yehuda.
Thank you. No, that's a scoop. So let's keep that within the 4 walls. But Yeah, that's fantastic. Great to know. We always claimed you, so we knew it even if it wasn't true. So
That's right.
yeah.
The nose gives it away, I think.
Now you've had a long and storied career, obviously, mentioned among the greats. But if we go back to your sort of earliest memories of footy, when you were a kid, when did you first realise that you had a talent, in terms of this sport in particular?
Oh, look, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I was acutely aware at a young age just how much I loved playing sport, and I could really zero in on doing the same monotonous sporting exercise for a whole weekend almost without doing anything else and just have an absolute ball. In summertime I could throw a cricket ball against a wall and hit it with about 10 hours on Saturday and 10 hours on Sunday by myself and just be having an absolute ball, imagining I was playing it on the MCG or that I was Dean Jones, and the same thing in wintertime. So at that age, I think I wasn't conscious that it was something I was good at. I was just conscious it was something I really enjoyed, and was probably aware from an early age at school that I was, a quick runner. You sort of work that out pretty quickly in primary school. You work out who's the tallest, who's the quickest, and I was always the quickest. So it wasn't something that was taken seriously probably till 16 years of age, but even from a very, very early age, I just loved playing sport, and from the age of 3, it was really my favourite thing to do. And
in terms of influences growing up, on football or in your career, or on, we're going to talk about high performance tonight, but was there anyone who sort of instilled a drive in you from a young age, or was that just natural talent, I guess?
Oh, look, I think there were just some really important lessons that I learned early on that were really beneficial for later in life. A really formative lesson was when I was a young kid. I think I was 9 or 10 years old, and basically in little athletics each year, I'd qualify for the state championships. For the 800 metres, I wouldn't really do any training. I'd come in the top couple for the region, and I ended up coming about 8th in the state finals. And that was how it went. And then one year, the same pattern was emerging. I came in the top couple in the region. It was 4 weeks to go before the state championships, and my dad said, "Do you want to do some training?" And I said, "Well, that sounds like a good idea." So we got up at 6 o'clock every morning and trained every day for 4 weeks. And at the end of that, the state championships were on, and I was able to win the state championships after a really short burst of training. But it was just a powerful lesson for, do the work and get a desired outcome, and how closely linked hard work and achievement are. So I think there were some really powerful lessons early on in my life that linked both working harder and also working differently. The standard then, most kids at that level would train twice a week. It was easy to see just the outsized returns you could get from doing that extra work.
Yeah, and let's move on to sort of draft. And obviously things have changed a lot in the last 20 years. So, you'd think if someone was going to be a top 10 draft pick today, they'd put in, the work and the training. And this is an assumption from looking on the outside. I know you're more involved in the system, but back then, 20 years ago, was it as, was there that much pressure as there is today, or does it feel magnified in today's age when everything's in social media and everything like that when it comes to drafting teenagers?
I think my draft got spoken about as a super draft, where you had Luke Hodge at 1 and Luke Ball at 2 and myself at 3. But I think really what that draft was about, it was the first year of Fox footy. So it was the first year that football had to deliver such a greater financial return to their stakeholders because they'd paid so much for the rights. So I think my year was the real start of that, but it's really gone to a whole new level now, where those under 18 kids are almost like little rock stars even before they get drafted. And, we know social media is a big part of that, and the scrutiny they're under is really intense. And even by the time you speak to them, or by the time they get into clubland, you'll ask them a question, they've already got these pre-programmed answers from their, the training they've done for interviewing at draft camps and things like that. So, it was professional when I did it, but it's gone to a whole nother level now, which is good. But there's an interesting cost there for the players. I think one of the challenges athletes and in particular have is they they probably don't get the chance to explore what they think about things. They, from the age of 17 or 18, they get pre-programmed into these are the answers to these questions. And with the scrutiny they're under in the media, they really don't get a chance to explore and think about things for themselves till they're at an age where they're no longer in that spotlight. And I think that's one of the challenges that players have to deal with post-footy, is that they haven't gotten used to thinking for themselves for such an extended period of time often.
And I think that's a criticism that's come up, and we'll talk about your media days, but it's definitely come up where players seem to say the cliches and have the party line where, you've got characters in the game like a Dusty or someone who potentially doesn't, perform that well on the media stage, but, assuming, a loyal guy, and you want those characters as well, because it adds to the different element to the footy, whereas you get those pre-programmed answers and so it's not even worth watching those interviews.
I think there's been a little bit of a shift at clubland. I think for a long time, clubs were paranoid that if people had different opinions on things, it would look like the club lacked unity. But one of the things Richmond, I remember when Alex Rance came on the couch and he got asked if he wanted Tom Lynch to be at the club next year, and he answered no. He didn't think that was a good idea. And that was a difference of opinion to what the club hierarchy had at the time. They were at the time working in overdrive to get Tom Lynch to the club. But they weren't disappointed with the comment or outraged. They accepted the fact that the power of the group lies with each individual reaching their full potential. And I think the more clubs can realise that the group is actually stronger when everyone is thinking for themselves and reaching that full potential. And I think more that clubs come to that conclusion, that the better off they'll be. And I think Richmond's really led the way in that.
So going back to that draft, the super draft that you mentioned, you've obviously, you've got the talent, you were highly touted at the time. How, not disappointed, but that's probably the first challenge you've faced where you went at a high draft pick, not number one. I wonder if you were disappointed in that. We'll touch on that, but also you had the adversity of going over to Western Australia. So, being highly touted, maybe some of your friends or teammates stayed in Victoria with their family and friends. And, by luck of the draft, you went over to Western Australia. How did you feel about that?
My main feeling was just really excited and relieved that I was going to get an opportunity to play AFL football, depending on how hard I was willing to work. It's a bit been made of if I was disappointed about having to go to WA. And at the time, my preference would have been to stay in Melbourne just because my mates here, we just finished school together and I was looking forward to hanging out with them when I wasn't, training or playing football. But, that aside, my overriding emotion was just full of excitement that I managed to get into the system and now could sink my teeth into trying to get a game of AFL footy.
And did you feel the pressure from early on of being a high draft pick? Did you feel you had to live up to something?
Not really, to be honest. Like I felt, I came into the draft off the back of 2 shoulder reconstructions and didn't play much footy in under 17s or under 18s in the end because of those injuries. So in a way, that was one of those moments where, in a footballing sense, something bad had happened and you wondered if you were going to lose the dream you were chasing. And in a way that took the pressure off because that fear of losing something, you'd already faced it at some level. So I didn't find that the pressure at that period a lot to deal with at all. Maybe it would have been different if I was number one and went through what Hodgie had to go through. But no, I was just ready to sink my teeth into it. And I played footy with a lot of guys who were drafted the year before because they had a birthday in the first half of the year. So I'd watched how they'd been able to perform and go about it and just had this really strong desire to be able to follow in their footsteps.
And you've been around a number of number one draft picks, obviously being at Carlton through your career. There was probably 5 or 6 at any one time. Do you think there's that extra level of pressure that comes with that particular pick through the media and the fans, and that can have an effect on performance?
Yeah, well, I think there is probably a little bit more pressure, but pressure is really just an internal measure. There's no actual, it's not something real. It's just something perceived by each individual. So there's certainly the potential for it to build more pressure, depending on how the individual perceives going number one. You know, people will say, you know, I mean, it's unlikely they're going to be the very best player in the draft by the end of their career, isn't it? You know, just because they've gone a pick or two before the next player, they're always really good players. This idea that they have to be the best player in the draft, I think, is sometimes unfair on them. But I mean, like I said, that pressure is what you make of it, and it's really a perceived thing. I look at Sam Walsh and at Carlton now, and he doesn't look to me like he's feeling that pressure any more than anyone else. And I think in AFL, everyone's got their challenges. You know, if I had to say, what would I prefer to deal with, the pressure of being an elite talent that the number one draft pick is, or the pressure of being, you know, slow and short with a shabby kick and scraping into the rookie draft? I take the pressure of the number one kid.
You just described my Ajax Fields career. Thanks a lot. It's still going, and you're welcome to play, by the way.
It might be time to wind that up, you Hooter. I have visions of you playing there on the weekend. I'm not sure how poetic it would be at this stage in your life.
So let's go to West Coast. You obviously played in a fantastic team. I mean, Cox, Cousins, Kerr, then obviously, you know, Judd. It was an unbelievable midfield, great team. Now, in terms of high performance, was that, you know, did the team push you and make each other greater, or was it just, you know, individual talents that were all together? How did you how did you drive each other?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think the thing, looking back, what was so powerful about that group was it had a unique competitive advantage. So it was just the most incredible group of running athletes. Yeah, I sound like an old retired footy player knob when I talk about it now, you know, the piss guy in the pub. But I think that group in an aerobic running capacity would just about be the best that has played the game before or since. It was just filled with elite runners. And I'm not sure if that was by design from West Coast's recruiting, or if that's just how it panned out, or if it was a little bit of both. But that was a real genuine competitive advantage. And I remember that the best team at the time was Brisbane Lions when we were coming up. And I remember talking to Ben Cousins after we got walloped by Brisbane and just got completely bashed up by them. And I said, well, we've just got to get so much bigger, you know, so that we can compete with them and we don't get pushed around anymore. And he said, that's the last thing you want to do. We just need to get even better at our running so that we're not trying to overpower them with what their strength is. We bring our strength and that essentially disrupts their competitive advantage. And that's really what happened. We got walloped by Brisbane by 100 points. The next year we upset them at home, and I don't think we ever lost to them again. And they were just an incredible team at the time, albeit starting to get to the end of their reign. And so that competitive advantage was unique and important, but then the culture really aligned to that. So the way that playing group trained is also just like nothing I've seen before. Everyone would rock up to day one of pre-season training and run a PB on their beat test. You know, led from Ben Cousins, who was just obsessed about having his skin folds low. There was a real culture there to watch what you ate and to come back with low skin folds that your running capacity could be where it needed to be to maintain that competitive advantage. So I think that's really where the power lay. It's unfortunate, you know, when that club gets spoken about now in that time, it's largely based around the off-field partying antics of a few players, but there is essentially a lot more to that footy club than just that. And the lesson that I take away from it now is just it's great to have a competitive advantage, but the culture needs to align to that. And, you know, when I'm investing now, if I were to walk into an audit and accounting business and say their competitive advantage was risk management and they were all dressing, you know, flamboyantly and they were having lots of parties during the week, you'd go, that culture's not really aligned. But that culture in an advertising firm that was reimagining the future, you know, that may well be aligned to their competitive advantage. So I think it's when those two things link up that organisations can become really powerful.
Yeah. And just on that, when you mentioned that Brisbane game, I think I remember you kicked a few goals and one of probably, in my opinion, one of your best games for West Coast, where, you know, just the speed and breakaway pace and things like that. Is it like that in games where you you kick a few goals early and you can not cruise, but you know you're on. And then there are other games where it's tough to get into and you've got to motivate yourself. What did it for you? How did you sort of turn on when you weren't feeling like you were in the game?
I just had a couple of little cues. I mean, I guess firstly, I had a belief that you measure a player on how they play when they're having a bad day, because lots of players can play well when they're having a good day. So that was sort of an overall belief that was really important to me and something I admired in other players. And then I just had cues. My general problem would be once I started having too many conscious thoughts once I was out on the ground. And so often the cue was just to watch the ball when it was bounced at a stoppage, but just to really focus on the way the light was traveling off the ball, to focus on the laces, to not just look at it, but to really watch every small detail of that ball and how it was wobbling in the air. And that could often trigger me to switch back into more of a non-thinking mode and become a bit more present back out there on the field.
Yeah. I think that's the lesson for many of us here in professional lives. It's when we have adversity, and it's about switching on or focusing. It's those knowing your own cues, when to you have that. Everyone's got their own little things that they've got to focus on in order to to maintain that concentration and get back into it. So also at the time, West Coast, you had amazing rivalry with Sydney. So there were a number of games in a row. I think the margin was between a goal or under a goal when you played Sydney over those years. And those games were particularly tense, like right throughout. I don't think that the margins ever blew out. What did you feel in those games in particular, where sort of every single kick or disposal really meant something because the margins were so tight?
They were just really fun memories, just two very evenly matched teams. And just exhausting sort of struggles. Like you said, you sort of knew no matter what happened, come the last 10 minutes of the game was going to be very much up for grabs. And even now, they're the sort of games I like to watch now. You can tell when players are just trying so hard that there's almost a blankness in their minds, and you can almost see it in their faces. That Richmond-Geelong game, you could just see what it meant to players, and they're almost in a really primal mode of being. And when you see athletes competing like that, it's just a gift to be able to watch it. And if you're lucky enough to be an athlete and to be playing in those sorts of games, it's really special to be a part of.
Yeah. And then we go back to the cliches where you play the 2005 grand final, you lose by 2 points. I think that was Leo Barry, you star. And then you win the Norma Smith medal. So, the cliche at the time is obviously you're not happy because the team's lost, but how proud were you of that individual recognition at the time? Well, at the time and now, maybe looking back.
Oh, look, at the time, I really, without sounding flippant, I didn't feel really proud about it at all. I was just so upset and disappointed that we weren't able to win the flag and achieve that dream. I think what it did enable, and I've said this before, is over summer, I didn't have that sort of shame that you get when you're a player and you don't perform in a big game for your footy club. That shame really follows you around for a long time when you're a professional athlete and you know what's riding on with your teammates and coaches and fans and other people at the staff and stakeholders. Particularly when you're a high-profile player, when you haven't delivered in those big games, there's a real shame that gets attached to that you've got to be able to work through. So I didn't have to deal with that, but I had to deal with just as much disappointment as everyone else, and like the rest of the team, came back with a real focus to go one better the year after.
Yeah. And how big was that challenge coming back the year after, having to face them again, another tight game? How big was that challenge?
Well, it's always an enormous challenge because there's so many moving parts to any AFL season. I mean, just having enough of your players physically fit for the whole season is a huge challenge. Let alone having the camaraderie in the group stay where it needs to be, the coaches being able to execute on point, management or the board not fighting with the coaching staff. The footy department being able to spend enough money. There's such a huge number of moving parts for any football club each season that it's always an enormous challenge. But I mean, I think in that age, I was about 22, 23. And the benefit at that age is you actually don't realise how hard it is to get there. I got drafted to West Coast. We had 3 years where we finished 8th. Next year we were runner-up in a grand final. It just felt that it was our right, to end up winning a flag. And at that age, I was probably of the mindset that if we didn't win it that year, there would be other opportunities. So, I think often the guys, perhaps in their late 20s, early 30s, as footy players, are a bit more aware that the years you have playing the game are finite, and if you do miss that opportunity, there's not necessarily another one around the corner.
Yeah. And in terms of the extra responsibility you had that season as captain, in your first season as captain, did that add? You hear, people giving up captaincy nowadays because it's, extra pressure and extra maybe responsibility. And did you feel that added layer, or, was it just, something that you were happy to do and keen to do it?
Oh, look, it's something I was proud to do. It was pretty early on in my career to take that on. It was under pretty strange circumstances. I'd grown up and Ben Cousins was my captain, or the captain, and he was still playing at the club and had been stripped of that role. So it was a strange way to come about getting a captaincy. And essentially, initially I wanted Ben to remain the captain, and that's what he wanted to do. But it became clear that wasn't really possible, and that was justified. And so then it became just what was the next best option, and it was something I was really privileged to do. But it's probably something that I didn't have a lot of lead-in time to really get my head around it. But certainly made do with what the situation was, and put my best foot forward with it.
Yeah. All right. So now on to this is one for the Carlton fans, coming back to Melbourne and the decision. I think nowadays it's very common for players to target particular clubs or nominate clubs to get there, and the deal ends up happening. How do you feel about, back then it was pretty rare when you said you were going to come to Melbourne and pick a club to play for, and everyone was sort of vying for your services. Do you feel that the game's opened up since then, and it's people generally get to their clubs, and is that a good idea, or do you prefer the more limited system where you got to do what's best for the club?
I think people generally get where they want to go now, and it's certainly the trades have opened up a lot, which I think is a good thing, particularly when you think about the lack of control you have as a player when you enter the draft. You don't have any control about where you're going to work for the next 2 years, so that's fairly unique. There's not many professions where that sort of occurs. I'm not a big fan of, or there's elements of free agency that I think are a bit concerning, where I think the AFL's overestimated the importance money has for players, and probably underestimated just how much players want to play at a top club. And you see now that so many of the really good players make their way to top clubs, and you see it in the NBA in particular a lot. And for me, watching, and I think the most exciting part about sport is risk. On the game, you watch someone jump on someone's shoulders to try and take a specky mark. It's so exciting because they've taken such a physical risk, and when you're watching it, you don't know how they're going to come down, if they're going to land on their head, what's going to happen. And so that's really gripping to watch. And likewise, when you see a player go to a middle-ranking club or a low-ranking club, you don't know the outcome of what that partnership's going to end up being. And I think that's really compelling to watch. I'm not as interested when a top player goes, to a Geelong or a top 4 club, because they're already a great club, and with another great player, they're going to maintain that spot. It's just not as captivating. So I think that's something that'd be good to be looked at. There's arguments to and fro. I mean, there's arguments for a player, if you get drafted to a bottom ranking club, why shouldn't you be able to guarantee that you do get a look at playing in a top 4 team? But from a game perspective, I think it's more exciting when there's more of a risk involved with decisions on the field and off field moves as well.
Yeah. So you famously had 4 clubs chasing you at the time. You had Collingwood, Melbourne, Essendon, and obviously Carlton. Can you give us an insight into that time? Were you pretty relaxed about the whole process, or was it, you know, did you feel like this was a monumental decision?
Oh no, I think I had things in perspective, but it was a big decision, you know, personally. But I was trying to just work through it as matter of factly as I could. At the end of the day, Melbourne, I just probably didn't feel had enough money to spend on their football department to create a elite football program. Essendon at the time didn't have a senior coach. They were in between coaches. So that felt really challenging to try and make a commitment to them. And then it really came down to Collingwood and Carlton. And with Carlton...
There's no contest at that point.
No, that's right. That's right. I had my teeth, so it just would have felt wrong to go to Collingwood. It was pretty simple. But I mean, Collingwood had finished 3rd that year, and at the time it felt like, you know, premierships are won not in the year they're won in the preceding years where those cultural shifts happen. And I probably felt that even if I was lucky enough to be a part of a successful Collingwood era, I probably wouldn't have been part of that entire journey. So Carlton was a team, and it just felt something very right about being at the Carlton Football Club. It's got such a wonderful history. You know, there's just some incredible people involved with that club, and yeah, we didn't end up with the success everyone at the club would have loved, but I had a great 8 years there and made some wonderful friends and absolutely loved my experience there. So I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of business lessons in sort of the process that you outlined. You know, it comes into your investing nowadays. Even you sort of got an unknown outcome. You have a process, you do your due diligence, and then you make a decision based on whatever information is available at the time. And that's, you know, similar to any investment and the decision that you make. But what was the most surprising thing you found out after you made the decision and you're already in the club that you didn't expect or was sort of an unknown?
I was surprised at how hard West Coast trained in hindsight. I had no perception that just how different that level of training, particularly the training players would do on their own. That was just very, very different. And that, you know, clubs have idiosyncrasies, but certainly that attention to diet and training that I'd come from was very different to the Carlton in those days.
Yeah. And you became captain without playing a game. What's your leadership style? You know, when you walk in, is it sort of leading from the front, or is it, you know, being very vocal? How would you describe it? And did it evolve?
I'd describe it as probably a cross between Gandhi and Jesus, I think, to summarize it. No, I would say, look, I think I'm a lead by example type of leader. I learned a lot about myself post-football that I think would have been really useful throughout those leadership years. So I did a personality test post-football that was really interesting for me. So I never realised how much of an outlier I was on certain personality traits. So very low in compassion, very low in agreeableness, like bottom 3rd percentile, like really off the radar. A couple of other traits, which I initially disputed before my wife pointed out that no, that's absolutely accurate. So, I mean, I think in hindsight, I needed to be a better relationship builder at Carlton. I think that would have been much more effective way to lead. And my solution for everything was really just work harder. So I would mandate, you know, extra sessions for the players to do. And I did that because I had a belief that the intrinsic drive of the players to work harder wasn't where it needed to be. And in hindsight, if you're trying to build somebody's intrinsic drive, the last thing you should do is extrinsically mandate them to do something. So, I mean, these were some of the learnings I had. So I think the lessons are to really understand who you are as a person, as a leader, understand the people you're leading, and then, you know, and also understand there's more than one way to skin a cat. So if I look at it in hindsight, the formula at West Coast was really easy. There was a group of incredibly driven, intrinsically individuals that wanted to work their butts off, and I wanted to work the hardest in that group. And we had cultural heroes that just trained more and more, and the culture got built around that, and it worked. But that same formula couldn't just be cut and pasted to every group in the AFL. And I think there were some of the learnings, and particularly learnings I gained probably once I wasn't captain and actually had some clean air, because when you're really in that, it can be a bit hard to see the forest from the trees.
Well, there are two particular games for me and maybe most Carlton fans, and I'll ask, I think you can guess one of them, but two particular games that sort of stand out with your leadership style leading from the front and on the field, and that's that Sydney final in the wet, where we went down, unfortunately. And the other one, which is probably a fan favourite of the last few years, is the Richmond game, the elimination final, where we came back from, I think it was 35 or 36 points at halftime. So when you go into, you're faced with adversity, you go into the rooms, it's halftime. I was at that game, plenty of Richmond fans there. They were, sort of overpowering us in the crowd as well as on the field. How do you come out and motivate your team to, I think we ended up winning by more than 10 points that game. We turned it around plus and then some. So how was there anything in particular that you did or said or, to turn it around?
No, I'd like to take more credit than I deserve, but it was just a really special game to play in. I think for a number of reasons. Like, we'd finished 9th that year against Essendon had their issues, and we ended up playing final, so we weren't meant to be there. And then we had a horrible first half. I think we were down by about 35 points or something, so we really weren't meant to win. I had a knee injury a few weeks before, so I wasn't meant to play. And it was actually my birthday, so there was a whole host of unique things, but I think it was the loudest I've ever heard a crowd, including grand finals. And it was just great for that playing group to get some reward. And, the group had worked pretty hard that year and just hadn't been able to get things to click. It was Mick Malthouse's first year at the club. But for a number of reasons, that win just felt incredibly special, but it didn't feel like there was one pivotal event or anything. I think it was everyone just believing that we weren't out of it. And, even Nick Dygan's game in that game, I think he kicked 4 goals and probably his second last ever game for the club, and maybe one of the first or only games he'd ever played up forward. Jared Waite lifted. It was a really special arvo, and by far my fondest memory in a Carlton jumper. I just loved that game.
Yeah. I think as the fans, you were always pretty reserved on the field. Like, you led from the front, you did what you did, the hard work, but you really, there was a lot of emotion in that game. And I think you kicked a goal on your left from about 40 out, maybe. Maybe I'm making it sound better now that
it was on my right from 25, but I'll go with the left from 40. That sounds much better.
Yeah, well, it was a great game. So you mentioned, back to Brett Ratton. So we had 3 finals in a row where we lost, very narrow margins. So one versus Brisbane, then the Sydney game, and then the next year against West Coast. So we felt like we were sort of building something. And then obviously in the off season, we had a coaching swap. How did that feel internally for the team when you, I feel like I was there, when, we sort of went from Ratton to Malthouse, and, there was a lot of optimism at the time, but in hindsight, it probably wasn't a very successful era.
Well, I was captain with Rats and really liked working with him. So I felt incredibly flat, and it just felt like a failure, which essentially it was. In that situation, the coach got sacked, but I felt that was time for me to move on as captain as well. We'd come there together. That was Rats' first full year as coach when I was made captain at Carlton. And we and the whole group and footy club tried to get something going. And like you said, for a while, it felt like we were on a pretty good path and finished 5th in one of those years. But for whatever reason, we just couldn't maintain enough momentum to keep moving up the ladder. And once you do lose that momentum in AFL, the incremental improvement from clubs around you is so strong that even if you are staying the same, you're really moving backwards more rapidly than what people realise, and that's what Carlton found in that era.
Yeah. And internally, did it feel, that era, as I said, wasn't as successful, and did it feel internally like that there was unity and that you were on the right path, or could you feel from the inside that things just weren't going the way they were supposed to go in that Malthouse era?
Oh, I think the first year it felt like it was going okay. Actually, to be honest, even the second year when we didn't play finals, I was really bullish in the back half of that year. We had some, I'm loath to celebrate close losses, but I actually thought the second half of that year, culturally, the group felt really close from a playing perspective. And I was really bullish on where the club was at. And in the end, the next year, it was just a complete bun fight, wasn't it? It was diabolical. So I think that's one of the battles you have as an athlete. As an athlete, you spend so much time lying to yourself, and you just have to. It comes with the job, I don't know what the percentage would be, but 30% of players, 40% of players playing each weekend will be touch and go if they should be playing, and they'll have relatively minor injuries, but injuries nonetheless, and will be in this internal battle where they'll be lying to themselves that their body's all right. Not dissimilar to you on the weekends there. You're
just going through my mind.
But it's the skill set you have to have. But, with that comes the fact that you're not always as attached to reality as probably what some people are that aren't quite as close to it and can look to it with a more dispassionate lens. So, I was bullish that second last year of mix, and in the end was obviously a long way off the mark.
You still close?
With Mick?
Yeah.
No, but I enjoy running into him, and I like Mick, and we never had any issues at all. The results we had on field were not what we needed. But Mick was probably the last generation of coaches where the ends justifies the means. You give me what I want, e.g. you play well, and I'll give you what you want. And so if that was Dane Swan or whoever it might be, a couple of Mondays off here and there, or if it was so-and-so who was missing his family in Echuca, he could go home for a long weekend or whatever. That was sort of his modus operandi. And I'm comfortable with that. I like that. No problem. But the modern day player doesn't like that. It needs to be, there needs to be a really strong alignment in culture and this and that. And they can struggle with different players being treated differently at times. Whereas it didn't bother me at all. And in that phase of my career, I was more than happy to deal with that. I think Mick ended up getting annoyed because he would give players what they wanted and they wouldn't give him what he needed on field performance. And then the players would get annoyed that they probably felt different players were being treated differently. So it didn't work, but it's also limiting to just blame that sort of performance on one person. It's convenient, but it's never true in organisations. If something's not working, it's very, very unusual. They're relatively big organisations, footy clubs, and when they drop down so severely like that, there's far more than one person at fault. And I was at the footy club, so I'm lumped in with that justifiably as much as anyone. But certainly the Mick years weren't a positive experience for Mick, and certainly not a positive experience in Carlton's history either. And
the end of your career was pretty disappointing, I think, for champion of the game. And as I said, one of the greats. You never get to pick your exit, but you were very close to almost getting to the end of the season. And obviously the Adelaide game, you had your knee injury. How disappointing was that to not be able to go out with go out in lights, if you like?
To be honest, it was more disappointing having another severe injury and operation, because I had 4 shoulder reconstructions, a wrist reconstruction, a nerve in the Achilles severed, a plantaris removed, the elbow operation. I could go on and on.
But you knew going off the G that day that that was it, right?
I knew that was it. Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like watching cars, really. You start off as the young, quick Lightning McQueen, and then you end up in a car crash and, you know, being wheeled off by players who are much quicker than you. So, I mean, that's how the journey ends. To focus, for me to feel an injustice at the way it finished would be to overlook such a fortunate career. I got to play 14 seasons, meet some incredible people, you know, captain a premiership, the list goes on. So the ending, you know, wasn't a fairy tale, but I couldn't have dreamed my wildest dreams the sort of career I'd have when I first got drafted as an 18-year-old. So all in all, no complaints at all.
So what happens now is when you're retired, and this question's actually from a chat of mine. This is from the Achtus chat, so shout out to the boys on Achtus. I'm a leader of that chat, by the way.
Okay, very good.
And
it almost feels like a bit of a cash for comment moment from Who You Hooter. I hope you're paying attention to the other chat groups. Just
I better get some cash. When you're walking down the street now, you know, people obviously are stopping and staring. And do you get still comments, or do you just sort of blend into the crowd?
I blend into the crowd now. My wife gets a lot of comments. I
was going to say, who gets recognised first? You or
no, she's well and truly past the mantle. She's got 850,000 followers on Instagram, Yehuda. But if we separate, I get half of them. So she needs to be very aware of that, and I remind her of that regularly. So it's a weird world. I mean, you know, we've often got a photographer camped outside our house. Even during lockdown, you know, so you only had to be an essential worker, and a photographer selling photos to the Daily Mail comes under the essential worker banner. So look, there are some strange parts of our world, but you know, we're incredibly lucky, and we've got 4 great kids and a marriage that's still working. So, yeah, no complaints there. But I mean, that privacy is one thing that, you know, I'm lucky because the game gave more to me than it took away, easily. So that's really lucky position to be in. But the game does take away quite a lot of things, and privacy is clearly the big one, or one of the big ones. It takes away. So that's something you have to get used to. And football's not the only profession that have to deal with a lack of privacy.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think from all the individual and team medals that you've won, you know, as I said, you're generally regarded as the best of all time, or one of.
Best Jewish player of all time, you heard.
Best Jewish. Well,
I think we can say that almost with confidence. Me or Ezra Poyas, I think we're the.
Yeah, well, you know, there's Ezra Poyas and Julian Kersner, so you know,
there's a few
with the greats.
Yeah, Ari Lusky, the big whoosh.
Yeah, Ari Lusky. I played juniors with him. That's another claim to fame.
Did we play against each other in juniors then?
No, he played for Ajax.
Yeah, but I played Ajax. Did I play against you in juniors?
I don't think we were in the same division, unfortunately.
Okay. All right.
But let's say that we did.
Okay, very good. Rivals, junior rivals.
I think I beat you on a one-on-one.
No, I'm not going with that, Yehuda. I'm not going with that. We need to fact check that.
Fine. Look, I think the offer's still there. I texted you, I checked it today, October 2018. We play touch football in South Road, District 5. The offer's still available Thursday night, whenever you want to play.
Thank you.
That tennis is your game now, but you know, if you ever want to come back to footy, that's the way through. You can shoot me a text. I'll be happy to do it.
Thank you, Yehuda. I appreciate it.
I think there's been a lot of lessons that you've given us tonight from your career, and you know, I don't think we're running short on time. So I know we sort of got stuck on the footy, but even post footy, you've moved into a professional career as well. So let's quickly just touch on it. So you now you do a lot of investments. You had your time in the media. I think that's been pared back for now. But how hard was it going from, you know, being a superstar in one arena to going to becoming, you know, a businessman or just a regular person like everybody else in the business world?
Well, it's relative. I mean, it's a bit challenging. I think it's challenging being really good at something and then not being really good at something. So just getting used to that sort of knock to your ego, whereby you're highly competent in one area, that area is gone and you really need to start again, and not just start you know, at a low level, but also try and rediscover what you're passionate about that's going to fill that void. So that just took a while. I think that's the main thing players need to be, is just a little bit patient when they do retire, because you're a bit like a kid that's finished school. You're trying to work out what the world is and what you're interested in and what you're passionate about, and to expect that you to understand that all, you know, a couple of weeks post retirement is a big ask. I think generally for most guys that play till they're 30, most guys, I reckon it takes about 3 years before they start to get a clear picture of actually what they're really interested in and what they're good at. And that was probably how it was for me, probably 3 or 4 years in, things started becoming a bit clearer. And like you said, really happy now, investing in listed equities and doing some finance media, and probably found a niche that I'm good at and passionate as well. So I'm very thankful for that.
And I think a lot of that comes from, you know, your drive. Like we have a lot of members in our YJP community. They're either starting out on their own or trying to develop their own business, or even becoming a professional within a company. And is it, you know, for you personally, it seems like it's, you know, internally driven. You've got that drive and passion. Or, you know, what advice can you give people to sort of trying to start out on their own, or really become successful and maintain that high level of performance in their arena?
I think it's easy to set yourself up to fail. So initially I retired from football, and the people I admired most in the commercial world were entrepreneurs. And so initially I thought, well, that's what I should aspire to be. But my skill set isn't all that suited to being an entrepreneur. Managing large numbers of people isn't something I'd be good at. But some of those personality traits I mentioned to you, you know, being disagreeable has a lot of utility when you're investing, because you'll hear a CEO walk through a presentation, and rather than just assume that everything he's saying is correct and true, your natural reaction is to be skeptical. So I think setting yourself up to do work or start up a business that's something that's suited to your actual natural disposition is really important, and not to just try and be somebody else or somebody that you admire, whether that's a parent or a role model or a peer. I think that's really important to set yourself up to win, because you do something that you're really suited to. And a bit like the footy club, you know, coming back to what your competitive advantage is going to be. And if you're not clear on what your edge is, then you don't have one.
Thanks a lot for the advice. Now, before I leave, final question. You've got 3 sons. They're eligible to play for West Coast or Carlton. How are they going in Auskick?
Well, they're pretty good. I've got a daughter as well who's a very slick athlete. So she may be leading the charge.
She can also play, yeah, AFLW.
Yeah, so Oscar is 9 and he loves his cricket. So at this stage, he's super passionate about that. And the twins are 4. So we'll see how they've got some good aggression, the twins. So naturally pretty aggressive. So we'll see with them. But yeah, we'll wait and see how that all pans out.
No worries. Well, now thanks so much again for your time. We've got a couple of quick additions to the agenda. One is a good friend of mine who actually had the idea for this event, and his name is Giddy Templehoff, and I promised him that he could ask you a few questions.
I've heard a lot of things about
Giddy's now on the line now. Let me just unmute him.
Hello.
Hello, Giddy.
Hello. I have questions. The first one is, what does it feel like being famous?
Doesn't really feel like anything, Giddy. It just feels like probably how you feel when you walk around at school and everyone knows your name. Probably not too dissimilar to that. Except if you were really forgetful and maybe you didn't know all their names. Can you imagine that?
My second question is, how did it feel winning a premiership?
That felt so special, because I dreamed of that moment from the age of about 3, and I knew that all the other players I was playing with had dreamed about it for a really long time, as a lot of the supporters and coaches, and it meant so much to so many people. So that was one of the most special days of my life.
And what is the biggest stuff up you ever did in your career?
Oh, I once accidentally chicken winged someone, Giddy, and that was maybe a low point in hindsight. Maybe a misunderstanding, I think.
And my last question, why did you choose footy instead of like any other sport?
Just because I loved doing it so much. I had so much fun doing it as a kid, and it was it almost feels like footy chose me.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
mate.
Thanks, Giddy. And now we've got a special treat. We've got the, I told Juddy before this call that this is the Jewish Trevor Marmalade. And we've got a special YJP guest, YJP own, Ellie Grimberg. So he's going to take this chair. Chris, thank you very much, and really appreciate it.
Cheers, mate.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you going?
I'm good. I'm good. Now, looking back on your career, you were known as an all-round player. You could get the softball on the outside, but you also weren't afraid to get your hands dirty and get the hard ball inside the packs. And I'm saying this because, in my opinion, Judd has served you up a lot of softball questions. And look, I'd expect nothing less from Judd because he lacks, that certain ruthlessness needed to succeed in business or life in general. So to make sure you're able to give a complete interview, I'm going to ask some hardball questions. So how does that sound?
That sounds great.
Great. All right, Chris, you're a Brownlow medalist, premiership champion. You played
two-time Brownlow medalist.
Two-time Brownlow medalist. You played in front of 100,000 people and attended all the A-list events. So I suppose doing a Zoom event for 200 Jews must be a bit of a low point for you.
No, not at all. I mean, firstly, Yehuda told me there was going to be 6,000 watching this. So the fact that there's only 200 is a bit of a letdown.
Well, look, I appreciate the answer, but it wasn't a question. It was more of an observation.
Very good.
Well, look, being successful in business is all about, sound judgment and good decision making. So how do you explain to clients why they should trust a guy who left West Coast to go to Carlton?
Well, that is a good point, but I'll point to the advancements we've made in recycling and environmental work off the back of that decision, and the fact that I was able to save the day for Victoria and the country through my tireless community work in that time, I think we'll be able to explain the answer.
That's a good answer. So you famously kicked 13 goals from the midfield in a game for Caulfield Grammar against Haileybury. Was it that you didn't know how to pass the ball, or you just hated your teammates?
I think I passed a couple that actually shots for goal that dropped a bit short, and teammates marked it. But sometimes if you want a job done properly, it's just better off doing it yourself.
Good advice. So speaking of which, you have a YouTube series called Talk Your Book, which shines a light on the processes used by Australia's best investors. Are you aware of how annoying this content is for people who are just trying to search for Chris Judd footy highlights?
I haven't been, but I will take that into consideration.
So I'm not sure the views are all well earned.
That's good.
So there's actually a question which I've had texted through by at least 6 people on the chat. Why don't you have AirPods?
That's been put to me also before, but I'm old school, to be honest. And I did have some wireless ones, but I find them hard to hear yourself talk with the noise cancelling. And the AirPods have run out on me mid-conversation before, which I find problematic. So I think the old school wire is where it's going to sit.
Or maybe your good friend and teammate Yehuda can get you a pair for Christmas. Hanukkah, sorry. So look, Dan Andrews is doing great things for North Face, but rumor has it he's looking for new endorsements. Any chance he could be the new face of Jagged?
We were actually buying him those North Face jackets and sending them to him just so there was no risk he would actually put on any Jagged apparel. So it's worked beautifully for us. It's set North Face back a decade, and I do feel sorry for their marketing team, but sometimes you just got to play dirty.
You do, and I don't think you'd look very good in leggings either. So have you ever faked internet issues to get off an annoying business call?
No, I haven't.
That probably explains why you're still on the line now. I think it was Giddy touched on this earlier, like being famous, it must make you a bit of a magnet for crooked businessmen like Yehuda pitching you dodgy investments and schemes. What's the worst thing you've ever been pitched?
Oh, there's been some shockers. I think some of the betting scams, they were pretty up there.
So they just flood your inbox day after day?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're some of my favorites. Some of the private businesses that come across your desk are probably maybe a little bit early to be classed as investable.
All right. Well, final question. Can I get an invitation to Judd Cheller?
We're just working through the planning permit with Dan and Martin Bakula at the minute. But once that's all up and ready, we'll have your invite 100%.
Well, that's great. That's all from me. So so thanks, Chris. I'll throw over to Moishi in a second. And Chris, I guess I'll see you at Judd Cheller next year.
Sounds good. Thank you.
See you later.
See you, mate.
Thank you so much. Chris, Ellie didn't hear us talk before at the beginning of our talk. This is only, the next step up in your career. And the problem is, where do you go from here? So on the contrary, this is not going downhill, Ellie. This is the peak of the career with YJP. But I want to just say something which really touched me, which was quite special in terms of what Yehuda kept talking about, and I think it's quite amazing when a spectator actually gets so immersed in a game that he actually becomes a player rather than just a spectator. And one of the greatest lessons we can learn for footy is that we need players, not just spectators. And Chris, you've been an extraordinary player, and you've been so influential in the game, but also in terms of your spreading of the message of hope and positivity, and we really appreciate that. And I love your humility of how you just come across so natural and beautiful. And when you asked what does it feel like to be famous, it was just being another guy. And thank you for that. So thank you so much for joining us. It's truly an honor. Thank you to all of you out there that joined us tonight, and it's really great. This is unfortunately our last formal YGP workshop of the year. We do have another few events at YGP. We've got a big Friday night dinner coming up this Friday night. If you have not RSVP'd, please do so. It will sell out, and that's going to happen this Friday night. And we've got a Hanukkah event coming up. Chris, you are more than welcome to come to either one of those. We've got an RSVP VIP section just for you, so just let us know. Although you're one of the boys, so just rock up anyway. But,
thank you.
And but to all of you, once again, thank you to Yehuda, thank you, Ellie, thank you, Brian, Zaman, to all of you, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all Friday night. And Chris, thank you. God bless you. God bless Australia. God bless all of us.
Thanks,
Take
Moishi.
care.
Thank you.
There's always that awkward moment. Everyone's waiting to see who leaves first.